chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Welcome to the next edition of our podcast, DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State. I am Manuel Ochsenreiter, Editor-in-Chief of German Zuerst magazine, and on the other side is Mateusz Piskorski. I welcome now here.
Hello from Poland.
So we are the podcast for social distancing and even for geographical distancing, since I still sit here on the African continent and you are still in Poland, right? How is it in Poland?
Yes, I'm still in the European continent, in the heart of Europe. I guess everywhere we have the same problem and the same topic now, which is the pandemic, and again we'll discuss some issues around that topic, which is every day in the news. So we are giving a little bit different interpretation, or we at least try to do so, of the things which are discussed now everywhere.
We became, since the last podcast, something already like an educational program for homeschooling, I think, because in the last podcast we were speaking about pandemics in the world and their geopolitical impact. And since there were so many and there were such deep impacts, we decided to do a second part, which is now in this podcast. Mateusz, what do you have, what interesting pandemic do you have to offer?
Well, for this time I would propose influenza. So
I love it. Please go on.
The so-called Spanish flu, although it's not Spanish at all, because if you look deeper into the history, it came from the United States, namely from Kansas state. So the first cases were noted there in the beginning of 1918. The First World War was still waged in Europe, and the first cases, the first people coming from United States who infected the European population were the Americans, of course. American soldiers.
But why is it called then the Spanish flu and not the American flu or the Kansas flu?
Well, this is, I guess, the question of good PR and information policy of the United States, even then. But
like the Chinese virus.
Yes, now they are trying to name the coronavirus the Chinese virus. And then they managed to name the influenza, the Spanish influenza. But honestly speaking, there were a lot of cases in Spain, and Spain was, for some reasons, particularly vulnerable for the whole pandemic at that time. And perhaps that's why it was called Spanish, although it was disseminated from the US, from Kansas namely. Then it came to Europe. From Europe, of course, it came to all parts of then British colonial empire, so to all of the continents, to Africa, to Asia. So that pandemic took, by different estimates, around 100 million lives all over the world. Of course, most people died in the poorest countries with no medical system, with no medical care. However, I think that this is the case which is really discussed very often, because it was relatively not so long ago. First and foremost, we still have in different countries some, let's say, family members, grandfathers who are talking and telling us the stories of their grandfathers and about the pandemics of influenza. So that was quite an interesting case. By the way, do you know the German theories about influenza? I mean, the German theories of that time?
Are you going now to embarrass me in front of our audience? Of course. Of course. No, I don't know. Please tell me.
No, they were quite
Teach me.
So the Germans, again, there was a Chinese factor, because in Germany there was a theory, I mean, among the military military officers and strategists in Germany at that time during the First World War, that the whole virus was a kind of biological weapon sent by the Allies, first and foremost by the US, with Chinese workers working for United States there, yes? So there was a Chinese factor, which reminds us the current situation, yes? And there was an American factor, but even at that time, I just want to stress it that even in that time, over 100 years, over a century ago, people were discussing the idea of artificial using of the virus, of the pandemics, yes? And this is quite interesting. I think that, well, we are not discussing, as all our listeners have noticed, we are not discussing various theories which are now very popular in the internet, in social media, and so on. However, such discussions are raised every time during any kind of pandemic or epidemics. The discussions about the artificial using of different viruses as a kind of biowarfare.
And that
so
is
that was a German theory.
Yeah, and that is really interesting. Just to say one sentence now about all the theories about Corona. The range of these theories go from Corona doesn't exist, it's just the flu, to Corona is an artificial biological weapon to reduce the world population. I think we have there the same thing, yes.
Oh, there are different theories, of course. Some people are talking about the ideas to reduce the whole global population, of course. Now you know that those theories, yes, you have mentioned them. But on the other hand, there are some people who are claiming that this is a kind of biowarfare on the geopolitical level, so that it was directed and designed against particular nations, particular centers of geopolitical power. Yes,
but you know what is the positive thing about that?
Yes, what?
that this time we Germans are not blamed for it.
Yes, exactly. But by the way, 100 years ago, you were also not blamed for that. You were blamed for, let's say, a little bit later during the Second World War for different pandemias also as well. We could also discuss that topic for pandemias caused by the, let's say, conditions during the World War II. Yes, that's another question. But, we are discussing about influenza, which appeared in 1918, which means that it was after the experience of using chemical weapons, yes, in Ypres and on the Western Front. So, anyway, people were thinking already about different forms of instrumentalization, I would say, of biological warfare, such as viruses, against their enemies during the war. That's why I guess such theories were present in Germany, although the situation was quite similar to the one we have now, which means that, well, even if the Germans at that time, part of the Germans accused the United States for disseminating this virus, the influenza virus. Of course, there were a lot of victims of the whole pandemics in the United States itself, yes? So it's quite similar because we see now the situation in the United States with coronavirus, yes?
Yes.
And still some people are claiming that it's a kind of artificial product of US laboratories. Of course, we don't know if it's true or it's not true. We don't have any evidence, and we won't have any evidence on such issues. Anyway, even 100 years ago, such topics have been discussed. And when it comes to the general impact of influenza, I don't know if you will agree with me, but I guess that influenza in the beginning of 1918 was also one of the factors which ignited the, let's say, revolutionary atmosphere in the ranks of the army, in the ranks of different armies of all sides, yes. So again, it was also a reason to stop and to cease the war during the 1918, yes, to try to find out a peaceful solution, as we know. And it was also a reason that, the moral, ethical level of the army at that time was becoming lower and lower, yes?
Yeah,
so there was kind of demobilization.
We shouldn't forget two factors when it comes to pandemics such as influenza and when it comes to World War I. That is, first of all, that the European population was already weakened. We had horrible starvation, especially in Germany, due the sea blockade by the British. So the population was already weakened down. And I mean, we were speaking in our last podcast about it, that sicknesses, diseases, and pandemics enforce public disorder and lower the obedience to the law and to the regulations of living together in a society. So I think these two elements might have been also encouraging the revolutionary sentiment.
Yes, exactly. On the other hand, it's quite interesting that some scholars, well, as we have told before, we are not expert on virusology, but anyway, there are some scholars which claim that the people became more vulnerable for the virus of influenza at that time because of stress. I mean, because of their psychological condition, yes, caused by the war, of course. Yes, so it was a kind of interrelation between the material condition, the psychological conditions, and the pandemic at that time. Anyway, I think that, of course, it had also its political and even geopolitical dimension, but on the other hand, it is one of the most often told stories about pandemia in Europe, at least, yes. So several comparisons have been already made between coronavirus and influenza. And just remember that influenza at that time took 100 million of human lives. So hopefully coronavirus will not pass influenza on that.
We have, with the number of 100 million, we should also mention that the world population back then was far, far smaller than today. So there were not 7-8 billion living on the globe. So there were far less people. So the percentage of the world population dying of the virus was far bigger. So let's hope that Corona passes by without passing the challenge. Yeah.
And you know what was also quite interesting, but it makes me think pessimistic about our future. The most interesting thing was that it had 3 different waves, which means that by the end of 1918, people thought that it was over, but it came back in 1919, yes, 2 times. So even if some people claim now that there are countries like the Far East countries in which the corona has already passed, yes, it might return, unfortunately. I mean, concerning the historical experience we had with influenza, yes. So this might take several more years even, yes, as it took in the past with different pandemics, and it might have different waves. So that's why I guess that, and that's another topic we are going to discuss. I guess that it will have a long-term impact on politics, on economy, on everything, every sphere of our lives.
I have a question in this context, which is far not as dramatic now as the impact of the Spanish flu, but also a political impact. As we know, there will be very soon elections in Poland, presidential elections, if I'm not wrong. And I was reading that the coronavirus policy of the Polish government will have also an impact on the result of the elections. For example, that public meetings are banned if there are more than 50 people, what is obviously not so good for the opposition, and that President Duda can, for example, use now his his presence as crisis manager, and that he is very present also in Polish media. How will it be? What is your opinion about the upcoming Polish elections?
Well, Poland is a unique country, I think you agree. But anyway, the problem is more general, I guess, and it's connected with internal political processes and democratic, let's say, or formally democratic procedures in different countries. We have already around 15 different elections and referendums all over the world, which have been either postponed, either cancelled because of the pandemics. We have a good example, for instance, when it comes to the very, very important Russian referendum, the constitutional referendum, which has been postponed by President Putin last week. We have also good examples when it comes to non-European countries like, for instance, Bolivia, which has cancelled its general elections. We have good examples in Europe, France, Italy, Spain, which have already postponed their local and regional elections because of the coronavirus. And and we have Poland, and we have the Polish leader. I mean, it's not, of course, President Duda, but it's the leader of the ruling party, Law and Justice, Jarosław Kaczyński, who is not afraid of the corona. And by the way, he uses or abuses the whole situation, the whole crisis, to organize the elections on the 10th of May. Yes, you are right. The situation connected to the pandemic, practically everywhere, it's not only for Poland, paralyzes all the electoral campaign, all the electoral process. Yes, you can imagine now we have even more strict limitations than you have mentioned. Yes, before it was the question of gatherings up to 50 people. For the moment being, you cannot even walk the streets if you are more than 3 people. Yes.
Yes, like in Germany too. Or
yes. So can you imagine how to organize an electoral campaign? I mean, particularly the opposition, how it can organize any kinds of, meetings. You cannot even meet in a studio. You cannot even meet at your party headquarters with a group of your supporters. Yes, party supporters, I mean, because practically all is paralyzed. So the only candidate who is present in the media, of course, every day, saving the lives of the people, or at least claiming to do so, is the current president Andrzej Duda, of course, which is the candidate of the ruling party. And the whole issue shows us that I think that most of the countries are not ready to organize more or less democratic decision-making process during the times of pandemic. Yes, it is the case of Poland, of course, when they want to abuse the whole situation and to push their candidate. Yes, it's quite obvious that in several months, I guess that if they postpone the elections in the autumn, for instance, or next year, the situation, the economic and social situation will be so tragic that they have no chances to win. You agree with me?
Yes.
In most European countries, it will be the same. So it's not very hard to predict. But anyway, that's why they want to use the less chance to organize elections and to win the elections. Because if you look at the social agenda and the social public opinion polls in different countries, not only in Poland but in most of the European countries, you will find out that for the first moment, usually for the first moment of the pandemic, for the first weeks or even months, you have quite an atmosphere of a mobilization, yes? Of an internal mobilization. So we are uniting and supporting our acting president or prime minister or whoever, yes, who is the leader in a given country. But after a few months, when people will feel the economic consequences, the economic results, the disastrous economic results of the whole coronavirus pandemics, the situation will be completely different. And I think that the leaders of the ruling party in Poland perfectly understand the whole issue, perfectly understand what is at stake. That's why, on the one hand, you have, let's say, authoritarian practices like that, like pushing our candidate, organizing the elections against all odds, let's say. On the other hand, you have the situation in different other countries, which I have mentioned, for instance. Also quite hard situation because they have postponed the elections, but no one knows when the elections will take place. Yes, so
yes.
This is also. I mean, I know that situation from different, with all respect, from different African countries, from failed states, yes, who are unable to organize elections. Now we have the same thing here in Europe. Yes, we have the elections. The elections should take place because the term is finished. Yes, but we don't know when we will be able to organize them. So that tells us about the failure of the whole system.
And there are estimations, I think this is from country to country different, but there are estimations that the crisis could hold on the whole year. So we are not even talking about postponing for 4 weeks or for 8 weeks. We could even speak about postponing them for a year, for 2 years, or for whenever. So I think that is a very important point when we speak about the corona crisis right now, that we are maybe not even at the climax of this crisis, that the climax is still coming upon us, and we simply don't know how many victims the virus will take. We don't know for how long, and what you mentioned, we don't know if there could be a second wave, for example. And is it true that what I was reading, that the Polish opposition candidates, that they are now speaking about an election boycott, even if the elections should take place at the scheduled date?
I know that Jarosław Kaczyński is not a very well-known politician abroad, but anyway, he is quite smart. That's why he has already made an insurance for such a case, because yes, that's true that the opposition candidates are talking about the possibilities to boycott the elections. According to the constitutions, you have to have at least 2 candidates to hold the elections. Yes, but Kaczyński and the ruling party has already registered a technical candidate. So that in case that all other candidates, the opposition candidates, would withdraw, they have a candidate, a quite technical one, who is totally, well, he's a no-name guy, yes, but they have collected the signatures to register his candidacy. So they have found a solution for that.
So there will be always a competition, right?
Yes, there will be a competition. A guy will take 1% and the acting Duda will take 99%, yes, in that case.
It will be very interesting, and I think when
it will be also interesting to look for the turnout during the elections. Yes, it's equally interesting.
Yes, and I think when the elections take place, we will for sure discuss the topic again, and of course after. But what is generally interesting, and I think you agree, that we have 2 developments in the context of this corona crisis. We have on the one side what is always during a crisis, what is not very surprising, that the government parties, which are in most Europe, they are centrists or a little left centrist or a little right centrist, that these parties and their governments, that they collect now support. As I said, during a crisis, very normal. We have in Germany, I think now the first time that the CDU party of Angela Merkel is in the polls rising again, and they have a horrible crisis behind them. So Corona somehow gives them some percentage, and it might go on in this direction, while opposition parties are a little bit losing. And I think it is in almost every European country the same. But what we have on the other side is that we have a gap which is growing. On the other side, we have the tendency to more and more public unrest. When we look, for example, to Italy, where the economic and the social life are paralyzed now since a long time, and the people losing their jobs, and losing the job means not just losing your income, it means also that you are losing your, or in the term like your social and your value for society, or it is felt like this. So these people are uprising, there are protests, there are violent protests. Do you see the same coming also for other European countries? Can it be a development we can imagine? Maybe not in Poland, but if we look to France, France is a very, very protest-friendly country. If we compare it, for example, with Germany, we have always the joke, what are 3 French people? And said, well, it's a strike, yeah?
Yes, yes.
So 3 French people on the road are a strike. So, and we have in Italy, of course, we remember in the last decades, we had another joke in Germany. So how long will it take until the tea is finished? Then you say, well, between 3 and 5 minutes. Oh, time enough for the Italians to build a new government. So
yeah.
these countries have already the sentiment for this. But do you think it is imaginable that in other European countries we will witness also social unrest caused by the economic and social consequences of the corona crisis?
Definitely yes, I guess, but I think, I don't know if you would agree with me, that the new protest movements will be totally different from those who formerly existed. I mean, you had a huge protest potential in different European countries, even before. You have mentioned France, so remember about the Yellow Jackets movement.
Yes.
The Yellow Jackets movement, of course, cannot exist in such form. I mean, in the real world. Perhaps it could be reinvented in the virtual world, in the social media, but not in the real form of demonstrations and so on. In Italy itself, if you look at the results of the elections, of the past elections, I mean, and the results, the support for Lega and for Five Star Movement, of course, a lot of voters of those 2 parties also used to be protest voters, which means that the potential even before the coronavirus was quite big. The same goes for other European countries, I guess, but the protest was somehow, let's say, assimilated by the existing political structures, yes, which means that there were traditional parties formed, traditional social movements created, and so on, and more or less they were, let's say, channeling the whole protest atmosphere, or even a kind of anti-system atmosphere in a given society, into the political spectrum, I think you would agree with me, yes? But I guess I just would like to ask about your opinion. I guess that in this particular case, we could talk about, well, let's say, completely new protest movements and social movements organized virtually in social media and so on, organized without the principles of let's say, old-style social movements with a leader, with a charismatic leader, with meetings, with the participation of that leader, and so on. So I guess that we would have to redefine the whole social science, the whole ideas present in existing social science about protest movements. What do you think?
I totally agree. And if we just take now the German example about the economic consequences of the crisis, what we have there now, and I think it's the same for any European country, the people who are now suffering, we are not speaking about the traditional working class, where it would be, I think, a known podcast to discuss if the traditional working class still exists or not. But these are not working class people. These are not the people who the so-called proletariat. When we see who suffers, this is in Germany. These are the medium businesses, small and medium businesses, business owners and their employees. So we talk about a class of people who were in the last decades totally immune against going on the street and protesting, and they were totally immune against any fear about their future and about their jobs, since they had well-going small and medium businesses. For Germany, we have always the figure of speech. The small and the medium businesses, they are the backbone of our economy. Just if you imagine that, of course, we have, for example, the very well-known huge car producers in Germany. And so we are, of course, like the car nation when we just think about Volkswagen, when we think about Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi. So, of course, but there are around these huge companies, there are countless smaller companies delivering small parts, medium businesses who have a patent, family-run businesses. They developed some techniques, some patent invention, and they are delivering this. So these people are all of the sudden struck. We speak now about the supportive group, the traditional supportive group of the centrist parties. We are not speaking anymore about those who were voting more or less radical left or radical right in the past. We speak about those who had a total trust in the government, who had a total trust in the leadership, in our constitution and in the state structure. So I think what could happen, even in Germany, and that means a lot, I think you agree, since we are the last protesting people in whole Europe, what could happen is that the crisis might turn those people who were the columns of the system into anti-system people. And then we talk, then the party is definitely over, and that will have nothing to do with ideologically left positions, ideologically right positions. This will have to do with a deep, deep sitting mistrust in the leadership and in the system, and with a feeling of betrayal by the system, because these people are those who are now suffering, and they will not forget.
I totally agree, but well, every social movement has to invent or work out a kind of well, not only a program, but also some ideological basis. Yes, even if ordinary members of that movement are not so interested in ideological questions, as you have noticed, sooner or later there will be some ideological trend which will be prevailing, yes, in a given social structure.
Which that will happen by itself, in my opinion, yes, but I agree. Yes.
Definitely, yes, but it means that, well, some of our listeners, I guess, are quite smart people and intellectuals from different anti-system small groups and movements. This is why I guess that there will be a huge window of opportunity for different anti-system thinking people, including some intellectuals, to propose the alternative ideology for those protesting people, because those people will be searching for global alternatives, global solutions, yes, changing completely their worldview and so on, yes. So this will be a perfect moment for the existing anti-system thinkers, anti-mainstream ideologues and so on, to propose the solutions they have.
We see, I totally agree, and we see already today, like when a thunderstorm is coming, you see the lightnings already from far. And I think you mentioned, for example, the yellow vests. I mean, we shouldn't forget that the yellow vests went on the street against taxing of diesel, I think. I think that was the initiative, that they went on the street. And the yellow vests they were wearing, since everyone has the who has a car, who is a car driver, has a yellow vest in his car. So that was somehow the thought behind all that. And the yellow vests developed within several months into a very huge protest movement. They had all of the sudden also the aims of national sovereignty. We had a struggle within, or we maybe still have the struggle within this movement between the influence of the one side of the Rassemblement National and on the other side of the far left movement in France.
Yes, but eventually both were rejected by majority of the yellow vests. Yes. So I mean they were trying, and they were. I think that if their protests would continue, if not coronavirus, yes, I'm almost sure that they would have created a new quality in French party system. Yes.
It was already debated that they could participate as their own movement, and in France it is legally possible in the European elections last year in May. So that was already. And I think what is now happening in Europe, I think that the traditional anti-system parties, if they might be far left or if they are far right, that they are missing right now this opportunity to see the chances which are now approaching. I think it could be too late for them simply when these movements are coming up, these protest movements, then to start giving content to this. When I look to Germany, I think the AfD is not very much involved. I think the Lega in Italy is not playing now such a big role in these protests. If you look anywhere in Europe, you don't see neither the far left or the far right or any other anti-system group or party giving ideas and concepts for the post-corona times.
You know, my impression is that those protest parties which are represented on the parliamentary level cease to be perceived as protest and anti-system parties in the moment being. Before, yes, you could have some representatives who are voicing your opinions in the parliament, protesting against different reforms. But for the moment being, what I see in different countries is that people are starting to reject the whole political class, and they are associating the existing MPs, even from the hard opposition, yes, as part of the whole system, which means that probably it would be very, very hard for the existing parties, particularly those who have more or less participated in the governments like Lega you mentioned, for instance, to be trusted again by those masses who will sooner or later protest.
I think that is the clue question for any kind of anti-system party. When you look in their history, when they were participating in governments, when they were participating, even doesn't have to be a national government. It can even be the mayors. It can be local or regional governments. Where did they just want to have a part of the cake, or did they want to change the recipe? I think that is always the core question. And when we, just as a short example, if we compare Italy with Austria, where we had in both countries participation of a right-wing anti-system party, the Freedom Party in Austria and the Lega with Salvini in Italy, we can say that Salvini was a guy who really wanted to change the recipe, while in Austria the Freedom Party behaved, let us say, very, very calm and very, very obedient towards the conservative coalition partner. What might have the reasons? This is now no judgment. It is just a view from outside where we see that I think that the Austrians might be not considered as those who could take a lead in such a protest movement, while it could be really a second chance for someone like Matteo Salvini. What do you think?
Well, anyway, I guess that people will look for a completely new style of completely new anti-establishment forces which were not present before on the parliamentary level or even more at the governmental level. So I guess that there are a lot of potential Salvinis now sitting in their homes and writing comments on their computers in Italy. Yes, and those Salvinis will have much greater potential than Matteo Salvini himself, I guess. Everything depends, you know, if you have just a short, small crisis and so on, yes, like it was before in Italy. Yes, then you can use as an instrument of channeling this protest the old existing party structures, yes. But if you have so deep, so profound crisis and remodeling of social relations as we face now, I think that something new will have to appear, something which will replace not only the establishment parties, but also the existing protest parties.
When you say something new, what is also interesting in this context, and this is maybe just as a very last thought, if you allow, in this context of protest movements. Our friend Professor Alexandr Dugin from Russia, he wrote a very interesting book, maybe one of the main books, and this is the so-called, or the title of the book is The Fourth Political Theory, just to say it in 2 sentences. So the content of this political philosophical book is that there were in the past 3 political theories, such as authoritarianism, fascism, socialism, communism, and then liberalism, and that the 4th political theory will be a completely, we can maybe could call it a postmodernist remix of elements of all 3 theories. Maybe if we would have discussed this 1 year ago, and even maybe with some mainstream politicians, they would have said this is never possible in Europe. But I think exactly that is what we are now talking about a 4th political theory, which might look in Italy totally different than it would look in Spain or in France or in Poland or so. But maybe exactly that is on the run right now. What do you think?
Yes, exactly. I think that every country, every culture now will be looking for its own solutions when it comes to expressing the protest in the coming months. And of course, it will be nor left nor right. Of course, it will have something in common with the idea presented by Professor Dugin in his 4th political theory, as well as with the ideas which were also presented by such thinkers as the French Alain de Benoit, for instance, which were also talking about the synthesis of different movements, different protest movements of different old ideologies. So I guess that's right. That's that all existing ideological heritage from different protest movements, beginning with the Marxist, radical left and so on, and ending at traditionalist, so-called far right, will form a kind of, syncretic mix, which could create a new quality that could be proposed to the people who will go to the streets, or at least who will sit by their computers and express their protest now. So the world will be looking for new ideas because the liberal system is bankrupt, as we all see now.
When we speak now about writers and thinkers such as Alexandr Dugin or also Alain de Benoit, maybe we can already allow a short view to our next podcast, where we will speak about the Russian writer and author and political activist Eduard Limonov, who unfortunately died last week.
Yes, that was... on the one hand, he was an artist. On the other hand, he mixed his, let's say, avant-garde positions with brilliant political ideas, which could be quite useful to be remembered in those hard times now.
And that will be, by the way, a real insight, since 2 years ago, or was it last year? Oh, yeah, it was last year. Last year I met Limonov in Moscow in his flat, and we were speaking almost the whole afternoon with each other. And we can give, with our next podcast, a really deeper insight, because it was very interesting, and he had some very entertaining remarks about the European Union, especially about Angela Merkel, but also about the United States. And I think it will be a quite interesting insight for our audience.
Yes, and I guess that we'll also recommend several books for the times of quarantine, books by Eduard Limonov.
Absolutely.
So listen to us in our next podcast.
You will not regret. Thank you so much, Mateusz. I go now.
Thank you.
I close now my bunker door because we have now enough fresh air in it, and we'll keep the coronavirus outside, and I will practice once more social distancing.
Okay, so we wish all the best to our listeners. Stay healthy.
Yes, please, because sick listeners are bad listeners. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And we speak
Thank
next
you.
time. Bye-bye.
Hear you soon. Bye.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.